Dawn crept through the dew-kissed glass windows of the Blue Plate Cafe, a small family-style diner tucked into a quiet corner on the outskirts of Seattle, Washington. The morning rush hour had just passed, leaving behind a warm atmosphere tinged with the scent of freshly brewed coffee, fluffy muffins, and crisp bacon, a fragrance reminiscent of seemingly forgotten memories. The old brick walls, faded checkered floors, and mismatched chairs gave the place a rustic charm, too humble to be called vintage. Locals loved it not because it was fashionable, but because it was familiar. Regulars sat in their usual spots. Waitresses knew orders before menus were even opened. And the cook in the back, despite his salty language, made the fluffiest pancakes in the region. That morning, the booth by the window, usually reserved for Sheriff Thompson and his crossword puzzle, was occupied by an unexpected guest. William Will Harrison, a 60-year-old widower, a reclusive billionaire who had built an empire from tech contracts and investment deals, so complex most folks just nodded when he tried to explain them. He wasn't the type you'd find in a place like this, too wealthy, too busy, too distant. But there he was, in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up just enough to seem approachable, yet his posture remained stiff, guarded, as if he'd never truly learned how to relax in public. Across from him sat a 6-year-old boy, pale with a messy mop of blonde hair that hadn't seen a comb that morning. Noah Harrison, Will's only son. The boy kept his arms locked tightly around himself, eyes fixed on the tabletop, as if it might do something unexpected. Every time a dish clattered or someone laughed too loudly, his small body flinched. He didn't speak, didn't look around, didn't touch anything, not even the untouched blueberry muffin on his plate. Noah wasn't like other children his age. He had been diagnosed with severe anxiety disorder and a developmental emotional delay, words Will had paid specialists thousands of dollars to explain, yet still barely understood. All he knew was this: his son didn't like to be touched, couldn't maintain eye contact for more than a second, and had never, not once, hugged his own father. Sarah Jenkins noticed it all without needing to ask. She had just refilled coffee for the couple in the next booth when she caught sight of the boy, shoulders tight, fingers twitching near the edge of the table, as if wanting to reach out and hide beneath it. She adjusted her apron and crossed the room with a gentle energy that made no noise. 32, bright-eyed despite the morning shift, and with a smile that never felt forced. She had worked here for almost a year, long enough for people to know she'd once trained as a pediatric nurse before things got complicated. Long enough to know she had a soft spot for kids, especially the quiet ones. She didn't rush to speak. She didn't crouch down and baby talk him like some might. She simply met Will's eyes with a soft, understanding nod, then looked to the boy. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "Can I get you something else, sweetie? Maybe some warm milk?" Noah didn't answer, but he looked up for just a second, and in Sarah's experience, that meant more than any spoken word. It happened so fast, yet in that moment, time seemed to slow down. A tray crashed in the kitchen, metal against tile, sharp and sudden. Noah's tiny frame jolted as if struck. His breathing hitched, shallow and rapid. His eyes darted everywhere like a cornered animal. He pressed his hands hard against his ears, his body rocking slightly as the world around him became too loud, too bright, too much. Will froze, instinctively reaching out across the table, but unsure what to do. His voice caught in his throat. "Noah," he said softly, then louder. "Noah, it's okay. It's just a tray." But the boy wasn't hearing him. People turned. Forks hovered midair. Conversations halted. That's when Sarah moved. Not quickly, not dramatically. She stepped out from behind the counter and knelt a few feet away from Noah, far enough to respect his space, close enough to be seen. She didn't speak, didn't reach. Instead, she opened her arms wide and calm, palms up, an offering, an invitation, nothing more. Noah stared at her, his breath still quick, his chest still trembling. Seconds passed. Then, without a word, without warning, he got up from the booth, walked slowly toward her, and folded himself into her arms. The diner held its breath. Will stood frozen, his hand still halfway across the table, his mouth slightly open. In 6 years, not even he had been held by his son. Not once. Until now. The next morning, as Sarah was wiping down the counter, she saw him again. Same crisp white shirt, same stiff posture. But this time, Will Harrison didn't walk in like a man tolerating the presence of others. He walked in like someone searching for something he wasn't sure he deserved to find. He waited until the breakfast crowd had thinned out before approaching her. No entourage, no assistant, just a man standing quietly at the counter, holding his hat in his hands. "I wanted to thank you," he began, his voice rougher than the day before, "for what you did yesterday." Sarah glanced up from the coffee pot, then gave a polite, uncertain smile. "He's a sweet boy." Will hesitated. "He's not like other children. He screams when doctors try to check his heartbeat. He won't even sit beside his therapists. But yesterday, he walked across a room and he hugged you." Sarah nodded slowly, not because she was proud, but because she understood. "Sometimes," she said gently, "kids just know when someone's not trying to fix them." Will was silent a moment, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "I don't know what you do outside of this place, but I'd like to offer you something. Not a job, not exactly. I just thought maybe you could spend time with Noah. Talk to him or don't. Play a game, read a book, or just sit. Whatever feels right." Sarah looked at the card but didn't take it right away. "I'd pay you well," he added quickly, as if embarrassed by the need to mention it. But Sarah wasn't thinking about money. She was thinking about the way the boy had pressed his face into her shoulder, how his breath had slowed while she held him, how for one moment the weight in his little chest seemed to lift. "I'll think about it," she said, placing the card beside the napkin dispenser. Will nodded, then turned to leave, but paused almost awkwardly. "One more thing," he said. "I found this on the floor of the back seat. It's, I think it's meant for you." He handed her a folded piece of paper, small and creased, the edges bent from being gripped too tightly by tiny fingers. Sarah opened it carefully. Inside, in thick crayon strokes, was a picture. Two stick figures, arms outstretched, a shaky red heart between them. It wasn't much, but it didn't have to be. Sarah stared at it for a long moment, her throat tightening unexpectedly. Some invitations don't come in envelopes. Some don't use words. Some come in the form of a child's drawing, born from a place deeper than language. She looked up, her voice softer than before. "Tell him I'd love to come by, just for a little while." Will nodded again, but this time, there was something different in his eyes, not just relief, closer to hope. Sarah didn't know what this meant for her life. She hadn't planned on anything changing. But in that moment, she knew something already had. Not because a billionaire asked her to help, but because a child she barely knew had asked her, without saying a single word. Sarah never treated her time with Noah like a job. She never carried a clipboard, never came armed with behavior charts or therapeutic exercises. She didn't try to fix him, diagnose him, or pull him out of his quiet world. She simply showed up day after day, on time, with a soft voice, gentle presence, and a worn tote bag filled with picture books, colored pencils, and scraps of blank paper. She always asked the same question first. Would you like to draw today or listen to a story? Sometimes Noah would point, sometimes he'd shrug, sometimes he'd say nothing at all, and that was fine. Sarah would sit beside him on the floor of the sunroom, never too close, never too far, and begin anyway. She'd tell stories without pages, just her voice and her hands painting pictures in the air about turtles who were afraid of thunderstorms or birds who didn't know how to fly until they tried. When she drew, it was never perfect. Wobbly dogs with too many legs, lopsided trees, stick people with crooked grins. Noah would watch, amused, and sometimes grab a crayon and add something of his own. A second sun, a missing cloud, a scribble that looked like nothing and everything all at once. Every now and then, when Noah's breath hitched or his shoulders tensed from a sound outside, Sarah would pause and say the same thing. If you feel scared, she'd say softly, you can hug me or let me hug you, only if you want to. She never forced it, never reached first, and often he didn't respond. But then slowly, something shifted. One cloudy afternoon, Noah dropped his green crayon and walked straight to her, arms open, silent. Another evening, after a long and wordless day, he leaned into her shoulder, letting out a sigh so heavy it felt like he'd been holding it in for years. And once, after a short moment where Will had misread his son's signals and spoken too loudly, Noah turned to Sarah, eyes wide and wet, and hugged her tight, grounding himself in her steadiness. It wasn't therapy, it was presence. And for Noah, presence made all the difference. Will Harrison had always believed in control, in strength, in discipline. His world was one of numbers and deadlines, negotiations and consequences. He built his empire from nothing, deals struck in boardrooms, contracts signed in silence, emotions left at the door. Affection was something you earned, vulnerability a luxury for people who had time to be weak. But lately something was shifting, quietly, uncomfortably. He found himself lingering by the doorway longer when Sarah was with Noah, watching as his son leaned into her side without flinching. He noticed how Noah's hands, once constantly clenched, now rested open in his lap. How his eyes didn't dart around the room so much anymore. Will couldn't explain the knot in his chest when he saw those small moments, only that they didn't hurt, but they did ache. He didn't say much, not to Sarah, not even to himself. But he watched, and slowly, the silence in his house began to feel less like a void and more like a pause, something waiting to be filled. One afternoon, Will met with an old business associate, Mark Davidson, over coffee in a downtown hotel lounge. Davidson, who made his money in tech investments, favored loud ties, was twice divorced, and never known for subtlety. Word around the club is, Mark said, swirling his drink, you've got some waitress playing nanny to your kid now. Will raised an eyebrow but didn't answer. Mark chuckled. Come on, Will. A waitress? What did she do? Bat her eyelashes at you. You're really paying her just so your son can… What? Hug her? Will's face didn't change, but something in his eyes did. He took a slow sip of coffee, then set the cup down with precision. Yes, he said simply. I am. Mark blinked, caught off guard. Will continued, his voice calm but firm. Because my son hadn't hugged anyone in over 2 years. Not me, not anyone. Now he does. Now he knows what it feels like to trust someone, to feel safe. He leaned back, expression unreadable. If I'm paying for that, I'd say it's the best investment I've made in a long time. Mark didn't laugh again, and for the first time in a very long time, Will didn't feel the need to defend softness. Not anymore. The photo surfaced on a Tuesday morning, buried among a stream of clickbait headlines and gossip-fueled chatter. It wasn't even high quality, slightly grainy, taken from across the diner through the window's glare. But it didn't need to be sharp. The image told a story all on its own. A small boy, arms wrapped tightly around a woman's waist, face buried in her sweater, and standing just a few feet away, unnoticed by the camera, was a man with silver at his temples and confusion in his eyes. The headline did the rest. Billionaire's son clings to unknown waitress, morning cuddle, or something more. By noon it had spread across local blogs, a few national gossip sites, and even made it onto a segment of daytime television where panelists speculated on inappropriate boundaries and why the wealthy trust strangers with their children. Will saw it as he walked out of a lunch meeting, a concerned text from his assistant popping up with a link in the words, "You'll want to handle this before it spirals." He didn't open the article right away. He stared at the thumbnail instead, at Noah, his Noah, caught in the most vulnerable moment of his young life, broadcast to the world without his knowing. And standing beside him in that photo was Sarah. His jaw tightened, his chest burned. In less than an hour, Will had pulled strings to remove the most viral versions of the story. His legal team drafted a cease and desist. His PR consultant called it unfortunate but manageable. But none of that mattered because in Will's mind, there was only one question that refused to go quiet. How did this get out? He remembered the quiet days in the sunroom, Sarah's calm presence, the drawing Noah made, the progress, the trust, and now this. By late afternoon, Will had made up his mind. He didn't confront her, didn't ask for an explanation. He simply called the diner, asked for her shift schedule, then left a message with the manager. Tell her the arrangement is over. No further visits, no contact, no signature, no goodbye. Sarah received the message during a break between tables. She didn't cry. She didn't call back. She simply walked to the back room, sat down, and unfolded the drawing Leo had once given her. The stick figures, the red crayon heart still smudged from little fingers. She stared at it for a long time. No one had to tell her what had happened. She'd seen the headline that morning too. But what hurt more than the photo was knowing that Will hadn't even asked her. He hadn't wondered whether she was the one behind it. He had just assumed. Outside, customers laughed over breakfast, unaware that something delicate had just been broken. And in the quiet that followed, Sarah reached in her bag, folded the drawing back into its original creases, and tucked it away. Some connections, it seemed, weren't meant to last. Sarah never tried to defend herself. No phone call, no text, no visit to Will's home to ask for a chance to explain. She understood, perhaps too well, that once someone like him made up his mind, words were unlikely to change it. And she had never been the kind of person to beg for what should have been a conversation in the first place. Instead, she folded a piece of plain, unlined paper in half twice and sat at the corner table during her break, pen in hand. No greeting, no signature, Just one simple sentence written in her soft, looping script. Not everyone needs words. Sometimes all it takes is someone calm enough to offer their hand. She read it once, then folded it again and slipped it into a small envelope she'd carried in her bag for no particular reason until now. No perfume, no drama, just a quiet truth offered without expectation. After her shift, Sarah walked to the gated entrance of Will's estate. She didn't buzz the intercom, didn't wait for anyone to come out. She placed the envelope gently inside the mailbox and turned to leave, her hands still warm from holding it. As she walked away, the sky above Seattle was turning the deep gold it only gets for a few minutes each evening. And in that brief golden hush, Sarah didn't feel angry, just still. Some things weren't meant to be argued. Some silences carried more meaning than 1,000 explanations ever could. The truth came quietly, like most important truths do. It was Will's chief of security who finally tracked the source of the photo, days after the story had already begun to fade from the public's eye. The image hadn't been leaked by a staff member or an insider. It hadn't come from anyone Sarah knew. It was a random customer, someone passing through town, sipping coffee and scrolling their phone while they watched from a corner booth. They'd snapped the photo without thinking, posted it for attention, and walked away without ever understanding what they'd captured. No malice, no scheme, just carelessness. Will read the report with a blank expression, the weight of it sinking in slowly. Sarah hadn't betrayed him. She hadn't used Noah's vulnerability for attention. She'd done exactly what she always had, offered kindness without expecting anything in return. And he had cut her off without a word. That same week, Noah changed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, but Will saw it in the small flinches returning when there was a loud noise, in the way the boy started avoiding eye contact again, in the tension creeping back into his small shoulders. The quiet afternoons in the sunroom were gone, replaced by a silence that felt heavier, colder. One night, well past midnight, Will passed by Noah's room and noticed the soft glow of the nightlight still flickering beneath the door. He hesitated, then knocked gently before opening it. What he saw made him pause. Noah was curled on the bed, hugging a pillow to his chest. His eyes were open but heavy with fatigue. He was trying to find comfort in fabric and feathers, something that might trick his body into feeling safe again. Will stepped closer. "Can't sleep?" he asked, voice low. Noah didn't look up. He just hugged the pillow tighter. Will sat down on the edge of the bed, not too close. For years he had tried to fix Noah, finding the best doctors, the most expensive therapists, specialized schools. He had tried to teach him how to cope, how to manage, how to fit into a world that always seemed too much for him. But he had never really just been there, just sat in the silence, just simply held space for him. Sarah hadn't taught Noah how to function. She had taught him how to feel safe, how to trust, how to love, and perhaps most importantly, how to love himself. Will had spent his life building things, buildings, systems, a legacy. But what Sarah had built with nothing more than time, patience, and open arms, it was something far more powerful. He looked at his son, small and quiet under the covers, holding a pillow that couldn't give back the warmth he craved. And Will finally understood. He didn't need to fix his son. He just needed to love him. Will found Sarah the following weekend at the local public library, sitting on the floor in the children's section, reading aloud from a picture book to a small group of rapt children. He stood at the entrance to the section, unnoticed for a long moment. He watched her hair tucked behind one ear, her hand tracing the page as she spoke. The children listened, but Will's eyes were on her face, not the book. There was peace there, the same peace he had seen on Noah's face once, before he had broken everything. When the story ended and the children scampered off with juice boxes, Will stepped forward, holding something far heavier than pride. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "Sarah, I was wrong. I judged too quickly. I didn't trust you, and more importantly, I didn't trust the kindness you showed my son. I broke something precious because of my own suspicion. I am profoundly sorry." Sarah looked at him, her eyes holding no anger, only a quiet sadness. She said nothing for a moment, simply looked at him, allowing the silence to do its work. Then she nodded slightly. "Thank you for saying that, Will." No accusations, no demand for further explanation, just quiet acceptance. And in that moment, Will felt a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying lift. A few months later, a new community center, fully funded by a generous anonymous donation, opened in Sarah's old neighborhood. It wasn't flashy, but it was warm and welcoming. Inside, there was a new program run by Sarah herself, who had left her waitressing job. The small nonprofit was called the Connection Corner, a gentle program designed not to diagnose or fix, but to guide children with emotional or developmental challenges into moments of safe, intentional connection. It wasn't therapy, it wasn't instruction, it was presence, warmth, and kindness offered freely without expectation. At the launch event, held in the sunny courtyard of the center, families gathered, unsure of what to expect. There were no suits, no speeches, just music, story circles, and soft blankets spread on the grass. Will stood towards the back, not drawing attention, watching Noah, his Noah, sitting within a small circle, not fully participating, but not withdrawn either. He was watching the other children finger painting, a gentle curiosity in his eyes. Then Sarah, seeing Will, smiled and waved him over. As he approached, Noah looked up. Without hesitation, without tension, the boy stood up, walked over to his father, and wrapped his arms around his waist. Tightly, intentionally. Will froze for just a second, then slowly he wrapped his arms around his son. For the first time, truly. No tension, no hesitation. Just warmth, just love, and the quiet, steady realization that the richest moments in life are the ones money can never buy.